Hey everyone, this is Andrew, and in this video I'm going to show you how I process the vocals for the new track Get Down on the Floor by my brand new band, Murder Nite. So you just heard a little clip. If you like it, you can click the link in the description below to take you to the YouTube page or the Spotify page and to the free download page. So Murder Nite's actually a collaboration between me and BigJerr, also known as SCARLit on the interwebs. And in this particular track, the way we did it is that he wrote this song, he sent it to me, I recorded the final vocals over it and kind of mixed them, but tried to leave enough creative freedom for him to do the final mix. I burnt out the stems, sent them to him, and then he did the final mix and the final master. So I wanted to have creative control over the way my vocals sounded in a way that would still give him freedom. So I'm going to go over how I did like the layering of the screams, how I did some of the editing, and what kind of plugins I use and stuff like that. So let's dive right into this now. I'm going to start with this section leading into the pre-chorus, I guess, because it sounds extra brutal in the screaming department.
Your face never looks outside. I find it intoxicating. Once more, it'll make you mine.
So that's kind of screaming section, and I'll solo this part so you can hear what the actual screams sound like on their own. Oh, this is a cool part.
Get down on the fucking floor.
So those screams sound absolutely massive, and there's only 2 layers to them. And they're relatively simple. So the stock, just raw sound of the screaming layer is this.
Your face never looks so fine.
Then after I throw on the Slate Digital virtual mix rack.
Your face never looks so fine.
And that's most of the sound right there. The only thing that's really doing is EQ, compression, and I think limiting. And this looks very intense, but it's really not that intense. So I'm using a Slate BMS virtual microphone system thing. So this is just allows me to choose from what kind of microphone I want. So that's all that is. This is a trimmer just to get the volume. Pretty much depending on how you actually record the volume of your vocals will depend on if you need to do this. Certain plugins expect a certain dynamic range or certain dB input, so you can kind of scale the volume of that. You can also do it, in your regions, click the track and then scale the gain of it. Then it goes through an EQ. And this I just roll off some low end, and I boost some of the top end to give it that shiny sound. And then there's some compression in 2 stages.
Your face never looks so fine.
So this compressor is to ride the vocal throughout the entirety. This compressor is just to hit the peaks. It's also at an 8:1 ratio. I throw on this Revival plugin, which is actually free from Slate Digital, even if you don't have their everything bundle like I do. It just adds a little bit of extra sheen or a little bit extra kind of like thickness to the bottom end. I'm just using it to shine up the vocals a little more. I do this little trick in my vocal chain a lot, especially for distorted vocals, where I add a heavy amount of saturation. If I play this part, you see that it's not actually going red, but it's adding a little bit of saturation mixed in at 50%. And then I'm limiting this with this FG stress compressor, which is modeled after some famous limiter.
Your face never looks so fine.
And that's pretty aggressive in terms of how much it's limiting. Next, what I do to the vocals, or this scream part, is I have this awesome plugin by Soundtoys called Decapitator, which is basically just a distortion plugin. But I'll do the before and after.
Your face never looks so fine.
So already, just by itself, it's huge. Now, the last plugin in this, the Tremolo, it's actually not active for most of the song. There's a couple ways that you can do. You can see that I've probably messed up some automation somewhere, but obviously it wasn't noticeable in the audio. But the Tremolo effect, I'm actually just using it as a convenience. So if I go into my automation and I go here, and then I look through my Tremolo Depth. So, that's the problem. Didn't catch that in the final mix. But what I'm doing is I'm automating the not only the pan, but also the depth of the tremolo in this one little section in the song. So and I could have gone in and manually done all the automation, but that's a lot of work, and a tremolo effect is much easier yeah, so that's all that's doing.
Your face never looks so fine!
Now, if we go into the second layer, I'll solo it as it is. I believe the chain is exactly the same. There might be some little tweaks, but often I get a good sound, and then I copy and paste it to an alternate channel. And then the rest is just trying to mix between the two. And then I have Decapitator on. Again, I'll do a little check here just to see if these are different or not. They appear to be exactly the same. So in this case, it worked to have them exactly the same. But they are recorded differently. So listen to this screen.
Your face never looks so fine!
Versus the lead scream, so to speak.
Your face never looks so fine!
So that's kind of like an aggressive,
Your face never looks so fine!
and then the backing one,
Your face never looks so fine!
that kind of thing. And then layered on top, they give this really thick, like demonic.
Your face never looks so fine!
Now, you'll also notice, if I go back into the automation, that I have all these valleys and stuff. This is just automating the volume to take away some of the breath in between. I started doing this recently as I got a little more into the nitty-gritty of mixing and how I process my sounds. I've been using more extreme measures than I used to, and often that will really accentuate breaths. Like, you know, you're trying to compress and limit and gain stage up your vocal so that everything's nice and even. But the problem is that makes all the breaths really even. So as you get better at making your vocal sound more even, all of a sudden all your breaths are like super loud. So I started going in and editing those out, and there was a cool case where I left them in, which was done on purpose right here. That like kind of thing. So there was a purposeful effect, but you know, a nice trick to deal with breaths is just to go in and volume edit them out. You can also chop up your takes and crossfade everything if you want. In this case, I wanted to preserve my comps. I could have saved them and then consolidated them in a different project, but I was lazy, I guess, so I did it in volume automation, and it works good. So that's why I did it. So just to focus on this little pan thing here, and tremolo thing, I'll just solo this part. And all I'm doing is on the tremolo, if I want to make this the tremolo, oh, actually, I already have it here. Tremolo depth. So all this is doing is when it passes this point, it turns up the depth. And I set the rate of this and the smoothing of that to get the right sound I wanted. But it still sounded a little boring to me, so what I did is I went in the pan and I just manually automated some pan automation. So it gives it a nice little flair that when you're listening to it, you know, you might not notice it, but it definitely, you know, it's one of the many little decisions you make when you're doing a track that add up to a much more interesting final product. So that's really it as far as the screams are concerned. If you want to see how I process the leads in the track, let me know, and I'll cover that in a separate video. But I wanted to cover these screams just kind of in one focused place instead of making this a super long video that covers every element of the song. But before I sign off, I want to show you a way that me and Jerry found to send vocal stems back and forth that works very well. So I could do a mass render of all these tracks and send it to him, but like he doesn't necessarily know what I want, and he probably doesn't want to have, you know, what is this, between 20 vocal tracks or 19 vocal tracks. You know, it's unnecessary. And really what it boils down to is there's some screams, there's some backing screams, there's some leads, there's some harmonies, and then there's some effects. So one thing that I learned recently is that, you know, you can put your effects on all your tracks, but there's some problems with that. When you start getting into like 50, 70, 100 track projects, all those effects really start to take up memory. So one thing you do to alleviate that is you put them on a bus. So what you do is you get all or some of your vocal parts, whatever ones you want to be treated with the same treatment. And you, instead of sending them to stereo, output stereo, you send them to a bus. And then at least in Logic, it's similar in every DAW. In Ableton Live, you just send it to a track, I believe, and then that track is like now your bus for that. But it creates a bus, and then you can actually right-click and hit create track. And that will add it to your normal track list. And now you can just treat it like a normal track. So if I want to solo just the vocals, I can hit this. And and then that'll give me all the vocals. And then let's say I want to solo just the reverb. Or just the delay. You can do it. And then so what you can do is if you're working with someone is you can divvy up your tracks. If you labeled them better than I did, this will be easier. You color code them. You can go through and you can say, oh, this is one of my lead scream tracks. This is another one of my lead scream tracks. You know what? This is probably one too. And then let's just say that's the scream tracks. And then if you're recording it to something, some kind of background reference, you click that, which is the actual track. You solo your vocal bus. And, or sorry, you don't solo your vocal bus because you already have your track soloed. And then you click that, and now when you do bounce, it's going to bounce it to the perfect length. And then once you're done with that, you can just unsolo them or you can mute them so they don't forget which ones were which. And let's say it's all your vocals, then you just hit solo and do it. If you really want to get fancy, you can route all your different layers that you would be exporting to different buses to make the process easier. I didn't think of that ahead of time, so that's why I did it this way. But then it's cool because all my effects are separate. So, you know, it's important for whoever's doing the mixing to be able to add their own effects depending on how the mix is going. So, you know, I had effects that I had in mind. I actually don't know how much of my effects that Jerry used. We haven't talked about it. But I sent it to him, you know, and whether he used them or not, the track came out great. But he at least knew what I wanted, whether he used them or not. So what I can do there is I can just hit solo, click the length of this, and bounce. And it'll bounce a perfect length of the track with all the reverb and then delay. You could also combine them. You could do a mass vocal export, whatever. And so with that process, we ended up with, I think, 5 or 6 vocal stem tracks for all the vocals. So I condensed 20 tracks to send them down to 5 or 6. And that makes his job a lot easier. And it gives me the control that I want as a vocalist to produce my vocals the way that I want them. So, yeah, I think this video has gone on long enough. If you have any questions or want me to cover anything more about vocals or this track or whatever, let me know in the comments. And like this video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe for more. I upload videos every single Tuesday and Friday. And don't forget to check out the full track using some of the links in the description. So I'll see you in the next video. Bye.